good evening to all of you for this last lecture of this academic year. And we're very pleased to have back with us, finally, after 2 years of his absence, is Rabbi Jack BEMPORAD, our good friend, who is obviously the director of the Interreligious Center for Understanding in the United States, and a longtime fellow and lecturer at the Angelicum in the Russell Berry program, and involved in so many other interreligious movements and projects that he comes with the voice not only of knowledge but of experience. And so it is with that great pleasure we want to introduce him this evening, who will speak to us on something from the book of Proverbs entitled Wisdom, Virtues, and Vices in the Book of Proverbs, Some Philosophical and Ethical Considerations. Jack BEMPORAD.
I'm delighted to be here. I consider this home, so it's like actually, and I must say that I've been so close to Father Pugliese going back. I don't want to even mention the years because it tells everybody how old we are. But I can say that I consider this Centro one of the outstanding institutions engaged in interreligious dialogue. And his bulletin, which goes out, I was saying this to Father Pugliese just yesterday, I think, that I cannot mention how many of the talks that I've given here that were published in his bulletin are now being read all over the world. A day doesn't go by that I don't get some notice from someplace saying that a person has read this, and then when I trace it, it's from your bulletin, Jim, and I'm so glad to see you and Teresa. So as I say, I really feel at home here, so thank you. One of the reasons that I picked the book of Proverbs is because, as you remember, there are really three major books in the wisdom literature of the Bible. There's Job, Ecclesiastes, and Proverbs. And since I gave a talk here on Job called a new Look at the Book of Job, and on Ecclesiastes or Koheleth called Some Philosophical Aspects of Koheleth, I thought just to complete the picture of the wisdom literature, I would actually say a few words about the book of Proverbs. Let me immediately say to you that the book of Proverbs is not a simple book. It's vast, and there's a great deal of, I would say, controversy as to what it really means. And I will deal with some aspect of it, although not all of it. Now, one of the things that one has to keep in mind when one reads the book of Proverbs is that it actually is written from the perspective of a more or less normal existence. Now, what do I mean by a more or less normal existence? It means where there's a certain kind of a society where things take place, and what takes place has a certain consistency, has a certain uniformity. It's not the kind of a book that's written in extreme, where, for example, there's crisis, there's danger. It may be that nothing will continue, or when you find things happening that seem so irregular so that you don't really understand what's going on. Just let me give you two examples of that. If you look at the book of Amos. Now, Amos was a prophet that wrote at a time of extreme danger. And he says in the fourth chapter, the 6th verse, I gave you cleanness of teeth in all your cities and lack of bread in all your places, yet you did not return to me. I withheld the rain from you when there were yet 3 months to the harvest. I would send rain on one city and no rain upon another. One field would be rained upon, and the other one did not rain withered. Or 2 or 3 cities wandered to one city to drink water and were not satisfied, yet you did not return to me. When you think of what's going on with global warming, where in fact you have a situation where we're experiencing heats heat, in places where they didn't exist, where you have the polars melting. The book of Amos was, in a sense, speaking about such an existence, not Proverbs. Proverbs is a normal kind of ongoing existence where people can plan and decide how they want to live their life and go about doing it. Or it's not the kind of an extreme situation that you find in the book of Micah. If you look at the 7th chapter of the book of Micah, what you get is such extremes that it would make no sense, such statements as I'm going to read to you now in the book of Proverbs. What it says is, the godly man has perished from the earth. The godly man has perished from the earth. There's none upright among men. They all lie in wait for blood, and each hunts his brother with a net. Their hands are upon what is evil, to do it diligently. And I don't have to continue, but if you look at the 7th chapter of the book of Micah, you'll see exactly what I'm referring to. This is simply not true if you look at the book of Proverbs. If you look at the book of Proverbs, it seems to me that what you have is a kind of a more or less normal existence. Now, you may say to me, why are you dealing with Proverbs, since we're not living in a normal existence today? If there's one thing that you can say about our existence today, is that it doesn't seem to be too normal. But the book of Proverbs says certain things which I think, even for our situation, have to be taken very seriously. Let me start by saying what's not in the book of Proverbs. How's that? It's always a good thing to know what you're not dealing with. First, there's no immortality in Proverbs. There's not much immortality in the whole Bible. But there may be some disputed passages dealing with immortality in the book of Ecclesiastes, the book of Job, and Psalms. There's none of this in Proverbs. There's no Messiah in the book of Proverbs. And not only that, there's no prophetic challenge of repentance. There's no real sense of forgiveness and repentance. There's no sin in the sense of idolatry. There's no concern about idolatry. Monotheism is taken for granted. It's as if this isn't something you have to fight for against paganism, against the pagan deities. There's hardly a mention. I think there's no mention of priests and only one mention of prophecy, and even there has nothing to do with prophets. So what exactly are we talking about? What is there? What is there are three fundamental, I would say, concepts and realities that one has to take very seriously, I would say even today. The first is wisdom. What does wisdom mean in the book of Proverbs? I think that the book of Proverbs has contributed to our understanding of the meaning and significance of the concept of wisdom. It doesn't mean what you have in other places in the Bible. For example, in other places in the Bible, wisdom is more pragmatic. It's more like know-how. It's like a carpenter has wisdom in the way he does carpentry. It doesn't have that kind of a sense, you see? And in fact, if you look at the prophets are not very happy with wisdom at all, because they are opposed to the so-called wise men who pretend to be wise and not really have any genuine sense of what God demands and how they should live their life. Let me read to you, for example, in the 8th chapter of the book of Jeremiah, the 9th verse, it says, very interesting, it says, "The wise men shall be put to shame, they shall be dismayed and taken. Lo, they have rejected the word of the Lord, and what wisdom is in them." In other words, they have a sense that wisdom is apart from any kind of religious connection. And so Jeremiah says, and in fact, in the next chapter, one of the great passages of the whole book of Jeremiah, in the 9th chapter, the 23rd verse, it says, Thus says the Lord, let not the wise man glory in his wisdom. Let not the mighty man glory in his might. Let not the rich man glory in his riches. But he who glories, glory in this, that he understands and knows me, that I am the Lord who practices steadfast love, justice, and righteousness in the earth. For in these things I delight. So, then what exactly is wisdom? And what is the book of Proverbs all about? There's no messianic king, as I said here. Now, let me just say that there's some interesting things about reading the Bible to any of us who've spent some time really trying to understand it. And that is, we try to see how it differs from different translations. Now, I think all of you know that there's a really, really significant difference in the Greek version of Job and the Hebrew. It's an amazing difference, to the point that probably the best commentators on the book of Job often refer to the Greek because the Hebrew is so difficult. It's a very difficult book. Indeed, I don't know if you're aware of it, but the Jews at the time of Jesus were reading the book of Job in Aramaic, not even in Hebrew, because it was so difficult. And so many of the modern day biblical scholars who write about the book of Job actually turn to the Greek because they find that the Greek may be, and I would like take Jeremiah. Oh, by the way, the Greek is much shorter in Job. Take Jeremiah. Jeremiah is much, much longer in the Hebrew than in the Greek. So then what is the real Jeremiah? These are the issues that come forth. Now, it's interesting, some books, like Esther in the Greek, in the Hebrew, Esther never mentions the name of God. In the Greek, there's over 60 mentions of the name of God. So you have to ask yourself, why is that so? Here's interesting. When you get to Proverbs, what I found really interesting is that in the 6th chapter of Proverbs, if you have it in front of you, you might want to take a look at it. In the 6th chapter, it has this reference to the ant. It says, go to the ant, you sluggard, and look at how wonderful she behaves. It's the 6th verse of the 6th chapter. Go to the ant, O sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief, officer, or ruler, she prepares her food in summer and gathers her sustenance in harvest. Now, what does the Greek do? The reason I say this is because I think it's very interesting. The Greek, right after that, adds the following. It's not in the Hebrew, but it's in the Greek. It says, or go to the bee. Not just the ant. Go to the bee and learn what a worker she is and how noble a work she performeth. Her labors kings and private persons use for health, and she is desired by all and held in great reputation, although she is weak in point of strength. Because she regarded wisdom, she is advanced to great honor. In chapter 12, for example, in the Greek version, it says, if thou art wise, thou art wise for thyself and thy neighbor. But if thou prove scornful, thou alone shall drink the evil to the dregs. Now, I don't have to go into much detail, but there are many, many places. And those of us who want to study these books, we should really do it with a copy. You get a translated copy of the Septuagint, and so you see exactly what the similarities and differences are. Now, what exactly is the book of Proverbs all about? Here, I think I'm going to say something that may, in fact, be controversial, but I think I can defend it, and any of you who disagree, please do your best to disagree with me, and I'll try to respond to it. Okay? Now, I think that the motto for the book of Proverbs, basically you find in the book of Deuteronomy. If you look at Deuteronomy chapter 30, what you have there is an amazing statement that I think summarizes the essence of what Proverbs is all about. And what it says is, I have set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. Choose life so that you and your children may live. This is an amazing statement. I've set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. Choose life so that you and your children may live. The book of Proverbs is a book that is founded on the concept of choice, that people have control over their lives, that it's not fate or the gods or anything of that nature which actually is in control. You are in control of your destiny. And it's similar, you have the similar statement, for example, in Amos, where it says, see good and not evil that you may live. I think that what you have in the Proverbs is that it's through our choices. This is what Proverbs is saying. It is through our choices that we determine what we become. In other words, it isn't already determined what you will be. It isn't already determined how you will live. It's the choices you make in one way or the other that basically on some level we are incomplete. And the very way we live our life completes us. It's really that our life is really open. Do you see what I'm getting at? It isn't something determined. And we can go in different directions. And in this sense, what the book of Proverbs is saying, and here I think is my main contribution to the discussion of this book, is that what we actually choose are influences. We choose influences. Now, this is obvious in many ways, isn't it? For example, if you decide to become a lawyer, like my son became a lawyer, well, what it meant is that he's going to be studying legal books. He's going to be meeting with other lawyers. He's going to be worrying about legal matters. And so he's really choosing an influence. It means he's not going to, if he was a historian, he'd be reading history. Or if he were a rabbi, he'd be worrying about Jews and Judaism and the religion of Judaism. So we choose. When you marry, you're not choosing a person, you're choosing an influence. That person is going to have a tremendous influence on you. If you choose a profession, that profession is going to have an influence. So there's no such thing as choosing, except you're choosing influences. And what basically the book of Proverbs is saying is that the kind of influences that you pick is going to determine the kind of life that you live. And here, what is wisdom and why is wisdom needed? Because you need wisdom to make the right choices, you see? Let's turn, if you have a Bible, it would always be helpful to have a Bible. Let me turn to the 4th chapter, beginning with the 11th verse. And here it says, "Hear, my son, and accept my words, that the years of your life may be many. I have taught you the way of wisdom. I have led you in the paths of uprightness. When you walk, your step will not be hampered, and if you run, you will not stumble. Keep hold of instruction. Do not let go. Guard her, for she is your life. Do not enter the path of the wicked, and do not walk in the way of evil men. Avoid it. Do not go into it. Turn away from it and pass on. For they cannot sleep unless they have done wrong. They are robbed of sleep unless they have made someone stumble. For they eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. But the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, which shines brighter and brighter until full day. The way of the wicked is like deep darkness. They do not know over what they stumble." So the way of the righteous is, let's be clear, it's a self-conscious living of life. That's what Proverbs is saying. Live self-consciously. Don't sleepwalk, Be aware of who you are, what you're doing, how what you're doing contributes to who you are, and how you become what you are. I think that that's something very important. And it's important to know that we have a book in the Bible that is, 31 chapters that tries to convey what this actually means, you see. And so I think what the book of Proverbs is saying is that without this challenge, anything that's really good in ourselves and in the world cannot emerge. Because you have to make certain choices that will determine really the self that will emerge, so that virtues are needed to make justice a reality. In other words, why is it that you need wisdom? Because it's wisdom that's going to give you the self-conscious understanding of what the choices are, of what the future may be, and then you have a choice of, is it going to be virtues? Are you going to lead a virtuous life or vices? Are you going to lead a life that will not only destroy you, but destroy everyone about you? And so what you have here is that there's an accent on wisdom, but there's also an understanding of the necessity, and here I love this because it so illustrates what Deuteronomy says. Choose life that you and your children may live. And so what you have throughout the book of Proverbs is the fact that you're teaching your child, you're teaching your offspring how they should live their life. So if you go back to the first chapter, beginning with the 8th verse, it says, "Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and reject not your mother's teaching, for they are a fair garland for your head and pendants for your neck. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, 'Come with us, let us lie in wait for blood. Let us wantonly ambush the innocent. Like Sheol, let us swallow them alive and whole. And like those who go down to the pit, we shall find all precious goods. We shall fill our houses with spoil. Throw in your lot among us. We will all have one purse. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from them." It's the whole idea of what kind of education, what kind of virtues are you going to teach these children, your children. And here I think you have very interesting things. What you have is contrasts. The book of Proverbs is a series of contrasts. And the contrast is, this is one way, this is the opposite way. This is one way, this is the opposite way. And get this clear. Once you read it over and over again, it sinks in, and then you know what it is basically that makes sense. And so you need wisdom, and now comes the problem. The book of Proverbs doesn't just talk about wisdom as being a self-conscious understanding of life, an understanding of the past and the future, an understanding of those things that bring out good in you and those things that bring out the bad in you. It has a somewhat more significant, much more significant role to wisdom. Wisdom, especially as seen in several places, which I will quote, is part of the creative act of God. Part of the creative act of God. It is the all-encompassing intelligence of God. It's the means through which God creates. Let's look at Proverbs 8 for a minute, which is, of course, the most important, that and another place, which I will quote immediately. But if you look at chapter 8, he basically there says, it's almost a talk about wisdom. Look at chapter 8, verse 22. Now this is wisdom talking, okay? "The Lord created me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts of old." The first act of creation is wisdom. Is that what we read in Genesis? Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Is that wisdom? Let's leave it there. Oh, I should translate. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, okay? The first of his works of old. Ages ago, I was set up at the first, before the beginning of the earth. I just translated the first verse of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Or another way of translating it is the first thing that God created, or at first. Barosh, it could be Barosh. But Bereshit is a very difficult word to translate because it's in the construct state and it's a complicated thing. I don't need to go into it, okay? So at first, before the beginning of the earth. So we're going behind Genesis. Do you see what I'm saying? Do you hear what I'm saying? When there were no depths, I was brought forth. The haaretz hayatatohu vavohu. Right? And the earth was unformed and void. And it talks about the deep, tahom, right? When there were no springs abounding with water, before the mountains had been shaped, before the hills I was brought forth, before he had made the earth with its fields, or the first of the dust of the earth, when he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep, when he made firm the skies above, when he established the fountains of the deep, when he assigned to the sea its limit, so that the waters might not transgress his command, when he marked out the foundations of the earth. We're talking about the creation of the world, right? He says, when all this happened, guess what? I was there. There I was beside him. And the Hebrew here is very difficult. Here it translates it, a master workman. The Jewish Publication Society translate as a child. I would prefer the translation as an architect. I think that's what the Hebrew means. I was there as an architect, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world, and delighting in the sons of men. Now, I find this, in some respects, complicated. In other respects, amazing. In what way is it complicated? It's complicated because you have many different stories about creation. And how do you connect that to some of the others? Let's just give you another example. If you look to the third chapter, I think it's the 19th verse. Let's look, okay? If you look at the third chapter, it says, "The Lord with wisdom founded the earth. By understanding he established the heavens." Or the way I would prefer to translate it, in wisdom the Lord founded the earth, and by understanding he set forth the heavens in their place. By his knowledge the depths burst forth, and the clouds drip dew. You have a parallel passage, by the way, in the 104th Psalm. If you look at the 104th Psalm, you have a kind of a similar things. Countless, this is the 104th Psalm, countless are the things thou hast made, O Lord. Thou hast made all by thy wisdom, and the earth is full of thy creatures. So what exactly does all this mean? What are we dealing here when we're talking about God creating wisdom, that God created the world through wisdom, that wisdom becomes the whole foundation of the earth? What it means basically is that the world is a product of wisdom. And if it wasn't a product of wisdom, you wouldn't be able to understand it. Why is it that we can understand the world to the extent that we understand the world? Because there's an order, there's an ordering principle. It is an ordering principle that we can somehow have a sense of. If there wasn't any ordering principle, what in the world would we know? Let me now just stop for a minute and give you some of the parallels that talk about wisdom, okay? If you look at Ecclesiasticus, It's a very interesting parallel. What it says is, wisdom was first of all created things. It agrees with Proverbs. Intelligent purpose has been there from the beginning. Who has laid bare the root of wisdom? Who has understood her subtlety? One alone is wise, the Lord most awesome, seated upon his throne. It is the Lord who created her, surveyed and measured her, and infused her into all his works. If God did not infuse this order of wisdom in all his works, which can be understood through our wisdom to the extent that we can be wise, we wouldn't be able to understand it at all. To all mankind, he has given her in some measure. All of us in some form or another have an aspect, a quality of wisdom. But in plenty to those who love God. Now, why is this an interesting thing? Let me tell you why it's an interesting thing. Because we are the heirs of Galileo and Descartes. And what does that mean, to be the heirs of Galileo and Descartes? What it means, basically, is that the world, for Galileo, as Claudia knows better than I, because she's a great philosopher, I'm so proud that she's here, it's a mathematical manifold. You want to understand the language of nature? Learn geometry. That's what Galileo said. Cartesian dualism says the world is basically matter in motion. There isn't any value. There aren't any ethics. There isn't anything that makes any sense from the point of view of morality. So that wisdom in the book of Proverbs not only contains knowledge with respect to order, it also contains knowledge with respect to ends, with respect to purposes, and with respect to the purpose that we must take on if we are to do the kinds of things that enable us to be fully ethical human beings. If you turn to the wisdom of Solomon refers to this, but the wisdom of Solomon is very much more based in Greek thought and has much more, I would say, to do with a Platonic way of describing creation. So in the wisdom of Solomon, it says, "For the almighty hand which created the world out of formless matter," that's Plato's Timaeus, right? I hope you all read Plato's Timaeus. "Was not without other resource. It could have let loose upon them a host of bears or ravening lions or unknown ferocious monsters newly created, either breathing out blasts of fire or roaring and belching smoke or flashing terrible spark." That's what the world could have been. And it might very well have been if the world was created by some pagan deity who was somehow ruthless or an evil deity who wanted to make things. What I find most strange is that the first time that I could find, and if you can find another place which explicitly talks about creation out of nothing, creatio ex nihilo. The first place that I found this, you will find this astonishing, is in the second book of Maccabees, which is very, very late. Here's what it says. "Look at the sky and the earth, see all that is in them, and realize that God made them out of nothing." So what you have here is wisdom personalized. And it's the sort of thing that one should take over from the creative wisdom which we find in the 3rd and in the 8th chapter of Proverbs. And then the question, of course, and of course the 8th chapter is poetry, and then, of course, how to actually work it out. And here I only want to, our time is almost up. I don't know what to do. I just began. Anyhow, here's the point. Let me just deal with one thing because it's something that's so controversial in the Jewish in Jewish interpretation of Proverbs, and I hold a view that is totally a minority view. So I'm warning you, okay? If you look at the 5th and 6th chapter of the book of Proverbs, let me just read this and you'll find this very interesting. It says, it talks about the woman who is an adulteress, the woman who is an enticer, the woman who does everything she can to lay in wait, to seduce the fool, the simpleton, the person who can't control his passions, and so forth. For example, here's what it says in the 5th chapter. It says, "My son, be attentive to my wisdom, incline your ear to my understanding, that you may keep discretion, that your lips may guard knowledge. For the lips of a loose woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. But in the end she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her steps follow the path to Sheol. She does not take heed to the path of life. Her ways wander, and she does not know it. And now, O sons, listen to me, and do not depart from my mouth." And I think what he's saying, it says it over and over again. Let me just say, she also says in the 7th chapter, you have the same thing. It says, wisdom will preserve you from the loose woman, from the adventuress with her smooth words. For at the window of her house I have looked out through my lattice, and I have seen among the simple, I have perceived among the youths, a young man without sense, passing along the street near her corner, taking the road to her house. In the twilight in the evening, and lo, the woman meets him dressed loud and wayward. Her feet do not stay at home, now in the street, now in the market. And she says, "I had to offer sacrifices, and today I paid my vows. So now I have come out to meet you, to seek you eagerly. I have found you. I have decked my couch with coverings. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh. Come, let us take our fill of love till the morning. Let us delight ourselves with love. My husband is not at home. He's gone on a long journey. And he took a bag of money with him, and at full moon he will come home." Now, it's very interesting that the contrast to this is twofold. Let me say first the first contrast. In the 5th chapter, it says, "Rejoice, rejoice with the wife of your youth. Let her affection fill you at all times with delight. Be infatuated always with her love. Why should you be infatuated, my son, with a strange woman and embrace the bosom of an adventuress? For a man's ways are before the eyes of the Lord, and he watches all its paths. The iniquities of the wicked ensnare him, and he is caught in the toils of his sin. He dies for lack of discipline, and because of his great folly, he is lost." Now, what this book does over and over again, there are a number of passages where a woman who actually engages in righteous deeds is praised to the skies. Praised to the skies. And in fact, even though the first few chapters of the book of Proverbs concentrate on the woman who entices men, and by the way, it's not just that women entice men, it's also men who actually go out of their way to find a woman. Let's be clear. It says, "Do not men despise a thief?" He says, "So is he who goes into his neighbor's wife. None who touches her will go unpunished. Do not men despise a thief if he steals, to satisfy his appetite when he is hungry? For jealousy makes a man furious, and he will not spare when he takes revenge. He will accept no compensation, nor be appeased, though you multiply gifts. There's no question here, like the prophet Hosea, there's no question here that men are as responsible, in fact, more responsible than women. But what is the contrast? And here's where I take a view that unfortunately is not necessarily shared by so many others. But this particular reading that I now am reading to you and more or less concluding with just one exception, and that is what is read on Friday evenings during the Sabbath ceremony at home. At home, when we say the prayers, the husband reads this to his wife, or whoever the woman of the house is, this is read to her, about her. It's the 31st chapter of the book of Proverbs, and here's what it says, okay? It says, a good wife who can find, Eshet Chayil, by the way, in Hebrew, it's not a good wife, that's a mistranslation. Eshet Chayil, it means a courageous woman, a woman who is courageous, a woman who takes charge, a woman who's in control, a woman who knows how to get things done. Good is too insipid, it's too pale. This is a woman who really takes things under her control. She is far more precious than jewels, rubies perhaps. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She doeth him good and not harm all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. She is like the ships of the merchant. She brings her food from afar. She rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and tasks for her maidens. She considers a field and buys it. Hello? This is a woman who considers a field and buys it? Right? With the fruit of her hand, she plants a vineyard. She girds her loins with strength and makes her arms strong. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. She puts her hands to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. She opens her hand to the poor. She's concerned about doing something for the poor, and reaches out her hands to the needy. So she's not afraid of snow for her household, for all of her household are clothed in scarlet. Her husband is known at the gates. Now, it's very interesting that everybody says, oh, the husband's at the gates, he's not doing anything, and she's doing everything. What kind of a relationship is that? Yes, except that if you turn to the 12th chapter, the 14th verse, it specifically says there that the man is actually working at the gate to deal with how to help the poor. So it's not that he's not doing anything of importance, okay? Now let's go back. So her husband is known in the gates, 12:14, by the way, if you want to look it up, okay? When he sits among the elders of the land, she makes linen garments and sells them. She delivers girdles to the merchant. Strength and dignity are her clothing. And this is my favorite verse in this entire chapter, because my own experience as a rabbi, keep in mind, I started being a rabbi in 54. So how many years is that? That's well over 60 years, right? And I find this to be true. It says, strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. She's not afraid of death. She's not afraid of death. Why is she not afraid of death? Because her life has been meaningful. That what she's done with her life is something that has meaning. She openeth her mouth with wisdom. She's wise. And the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She's kind. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, he praises her. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain. but a woman who fears the Lord. And fears the Lord actually means who practices religion. If you want, I'll go into it. I don't have time, okay? Practices religion is to be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gate. In conclusion, I want to quote a verse from the 5th chapter, the 11th verse of the 5th chapter. It says, at the end of your life, a person who has chosen folly, who have chosen vices, who have chosen basically the exploitation of others and doing evil, at the end of your life, you groan when your flesh and body are consumed. When your flesh and body are consumed. There is a sense of truth to that. And here's what I mean. I've known many, many people over the years who have been ruthless and been quite successful in worldly terms, in the sense that they made a lot of money, but they don't deal with death very well. They really don't. That's been my experience as a rabbi. They don't deal with death very well. And it's almost like they reach a point and they say, you know, what really has my life been? And let me conclude with something that I said to my students yesterday. I remember once asking my dear, wonderful professor, a giant, Hans Jonas, who I was very close to for 30 years. I asked him, because he's a great scholar, one of the greatest ever, the foremost authority on Gnosticism, you know. I said, what sense do you make when it says, it repenteth of God that he made man, and it grieved him to his heart? That God somehow was sorry when he saw what human beings were doing to one another. And Jonas said this to me. He says, you live your life in such a way that God doesn't repent that he made you. I mentioned that to my son, Henry. And he said to me, Dad, you know what's even worse? And I couldn't understand what could be worse. And he said, if you reflect on your life and you look at your life and you felt your life was meaningless, you felt your life was fruitless, you felt your life didn't stand by any real values, and you repent that God created you. And so this verse, at the end of your life you groan, when the flesh of your body is consumed, and you repent that God created you.
Well, as always, your wisdom shines forth in our midst, and we're very happy to have you come back again, so there's no problem. You have some questions, starting first from your assistant, who is going to grill you.
She's my wife.
Your wife is going to grill you then.
No, I'm saying that so she'll be kind.
You said that your interpretation is in the minority, that it differed, but you never said what the other interpretation was.
Well, you can present that interpretation.
Well, that's my personal interpretation.
Well, say it.
So we have
the interpretation, of course, is, look, she does everything and he does nothing. What kind of a relationship is that? You know? But the reality is, if you look at a society where women were seen, in other societies especially, as property, as under the total control of their husband, who had no autonomy, had no authority, had to somehow manipulate men to get whatever they wanted, or they had to act deviously to achieve their goals, this tells the lie to that. You see the point? And the very fact that in Jewish homes, the husband recites that to the wife is a way of saying, I understand that you have this potential and I respect it. I'm not going to make an object of you. Even though in society it's easy to do. Because, look, I think the greatest injustice in history, in my opinion, is the way women have been treated. Worse than any other injustice, by far. And I think it's a disgrace, first of all, that women have to be defined by men as to what makes a woman a good woman. Think of Leah, who said, now my husband will love me because I've given him so many children. As if her life doesn't mean anything except as the bearer of children. Look at what Tamara has to do to get Judah to get her a husband that he promised her, where she has to actually entice him in the 38th chapter of Genesis. I mean, come on now. One of the things that amazes me is that during the Passover, we have the Seder, we have the ceremony for Passover. Women are not mentioned, and yet the two women that are most important are the two midwives who saved the Jews and the daughter of Pharaoh who rescues Moses. Why is it that that isn't even mentioned? So the very fact that Proverbs has this wonderful, wonderful statement about what women are and can do, to my mind, is so important, you see. Yes, please.
Thank you, Rabbi Jack. But can I ask you, what actually is wisdom? Because everything is so relative in society today, and what you were looking at was saying, is a contrast, vice versus virtue. In today's very relative society, people can't recognize virtue from vice. And then when you refer to Proverbs 8:22, the Lord brought me forth as the first of his works.
Yes.
But God is wisdom, so he didn't create wisdom, he infused his wisdom in the world, I assume. So what I'm thinking is, and would you agree, from the prayer, the Our Father, thy will be done. So it's our wisdom in accordance with God's wisdom. We live our lives in accordance with God's will. Is that wisdom?
Yes.
And if it is.
Yes. In fact, I would say that that's exactly the point that is being made, and that's why wisdom is associated with the fear of the Lord. Now, the fear of the Lord actually means the practice of religion. And what is the practice of religion? Following the Torah, following the ethics and the rules. You see, look, why is it so important to act in certain ways? Because those acts have to become habits. Here's what I'm saying. It's where your inclinations and your obligations change. Kant was the one who basically said that you have to make a distinction between your obligations and your inclinations, okay? Now, really the point is your obligations should become your inclinations, and your inclinations should become your obligations. So that if your obligation is to be kind, but your inclination is not to be kind, you should so change your inclination as to become kind, and it becomes the habit. You see, so the reason the proverb goes over and over and over again, that this is what you should do, this is what you should be thinking about, this is what you should be self-conscious about, is because your obligations should, or almost automatically, through your taking upon yourself this kind of a life. Don't minimize that we create ourselves, that we are incomplete, so that these obligations then become the way we go about our life. Because I think Kant was right in this respect, that most people really basically concerned about themselves, and the other person is only secondary. By the way, that's why you need a Leviticus 19:18 to say, love your neighbor because he is equal to you, not like yourself. Kamocha does not mean like yourself, it means equal to you. He's on the same level as you. And what is equality in the Bible? Equality in the Bible is to bring those people who are beneath you to your level. Why in the world would the Bible spend so much time, 37 times, talking about the stranger, and that there should be one law for the homeborn and the stranger? Why is it that the Bible is constantly talking about the poor, the widow, and the orphan? What is it that unites them? They have no one to protect them. The widow has no husband, the orphan has no parents, and the stranger has no community. So you're obliged to care for them. That's why you have the corners of the field, you have the laws for the poor, you have all kinds of legislation. If you didn't have the legislation, it wouldn't get done. But to create that legislation, you have to have people who are willing to take it upon themselves to do it. I didn't go into those passages in the Proverbs where it deals with kings in the 29th and 30th and 31st chapter. You might want to look at them. Very interesting. The duties of a wise king. You see? Look, you have to forgive me, but I gave a series of lectures on the book of Proverbs in many, many different sessions. And I tried to sort of compress it for today, so I feel that I haven't really done justice to the book. But you can read it, and it's not something that's that difficult, so read it, and then maybe if we ever get together again, we can discuss it.
From the online platform, there are one comment and one question. One comment from Paola Bernardini. Thank you, Rabbi Jack, for the inspiring lecture. I'm sure we all agree with her. And then from Sarah Joan, who wrote the book of Proverbs?
Well, you know, the book of Proverbs is attributed to Solomon, right? Now, why is that? Because they say that Solomon, in his youth, wrote the Songs of Songs, which is love poetry. In his maturity, he wrote Proverbs. And in his old age, he wrote Koheleth, vanity of vanity, all is vanities. Now, it is in the book of Proverbs where it says, these are the sayings of Solomon. And you have in Kings, in 1 Kings, where it says that Solomon made over 1,000 parables, not parables, what is it, Proverbs, and also parables. But all of the modern scholars deny that. Why? Because the kind of a Sitzenleben, that is the actual community that the book of Proverbs represents, is very late. And so they don't think it refers to Solomon. Now, some people claim, well, some of it could have been Solomon, and I don't disagree with that. But because, after all, the Bible does accumulate, and it integrates past. But I don't think at this point anyone really knows for sure who wrote. And Paula, I'm delighted that we love you. And Paula is one of the great, really scholars that we have today, who was a student of ours at the Berry Center and so forth. And she's now got a most responsible position, and we just love her. She's wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah, you did mention that the first place you found that God created ex nihilo, created the word ex nihilo, is in the book of Maccabees.
Second Maccabees.
Second Maccabees.
Yes.
But I was taken aback because it's actually found also in the book of Genesis. So I don't know how you arrived at that. Is it first in the book of Genesis or in Second Maccabees?
Okay, that's a good question.
So that's my first question.
Oh, okay, you have another one?
Yes, I have another one.
Okay, let me struggle to answer your first before you... What's your second one? Go on, let's see these.
Okay. Yeah, the second one is, you mentioned that the fear of the Lord is actually wisdom. Mm-hmm. And wisdom, and this fear of the Lord means
practice of religion.
The practice of religion. Yeah. Now, we live in a world where there is almost a general feeling of the sense of the death of God, like Nietzsche would put it, the death of God.
Yeah.
And there is this feeling that religion is no longer needed. So, living in such a world, how do we convince people today of the value of religion to humanity?
We'll take the microphone from you.
All right, let Claudia ask her question while I'm thinking about you.
Reply first. No, reply first.
Oh, you want me to reply? First of all, there's a lot of controversy as to what Bereshit, bara Elohim, et hashamayim ve'et haaretz really means, okay? First of all, the problem is that Bereshit is in the construct state, which means that it has to be translated as follows: in the beginning of. So Rashi and others say that it's Bereshit baro, not Bereshit bara. It's in other words, in his beginning. And when God began creating the heaven and the earth, although that's very hard to say, because then you wouldn't use the direct object. You see, it wouldn't be Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Okay? And then it says, v'haaretz hayat hatohu v'avohu, and the earth was unformed and void. Now, and darkness was on the face of the deep. Now, a lot of people argue that the deep was already there. It's not clear. Now, my own feeling is that the first chapter of Genesis is clearly creation out of nothing. That's what I think, okay? But it's not universally shared by biblical scholars, especially people who've done work on Genesis. You know, you have to look and see what Von Rad said, who's probably the best commentator on Genesis. But I can see where someone would have a problem with Bereshit bara Elohim. Because keep in mind, the vowels were never there. They were put in later. And so it's a difficult text. Whereas what you have in Maccabees is absolutely clear, out of nothing. It didn't say that God created the world out of nothing in the first verse of the first chapter of Genesis, right? And so all I'm saying is that this is the first place that I know where it says it explicitly. That doesn't mean that it didn't say it in Genesis. I think it did. But it's not, I would say that I can't tell you that it's the universal interpretation of the first verse of the first chapter of Genesis. Now, your second question is a much more comprehensive question, where you're talking about the death of God and that people are not religious and people find it very difficult to believe and things of that nature. All I can say is that I remember this wonderful story where this student of Schopenhauer, the student of Schopenhauer, went over to visit his teacher. Now, Schopenhauer wrote at length against God. He was an atheist, a self-declared atheist, and so forth. And the student found Schopenhauer on his knees praying. So the student was taken aback. He said, "Her Professor Schopenhauer, you're an atheist. You're saying that that God doesn't exist. How can you be praying?" He says, "What are you talking about? Can't you see that I'm sick?" So all of a sudden, or that wonderful story about this guy who's walking in the forest, and there's this ferocious. He was an agnostic. He didn't know whether God existed or not. And as he's walking in this forest, this ferocious bear comes after him, and he's terrified. And he goes on and he says, "God," he says, "I've never asked you for help, and I'm not asking you for help now, but please, God, don't help the bear." So, I don't know. You have to say what mood. You know that even Nietzsche, when he became sort of demented, signed letters saying the crucified one. I mean, he was the son of he was the son of a Protestant pastor. A good deal of his theology was a rebellion against his father. And Nietzsche may be wrong. Did it occur to you that he may be wrong just because he says it? Now, it's true that we may not have done enough to convince people to live a meaningful, ethical life. But as the Midrash says, would that they forsake me and keep my commandments, because by keeping my commandments, they will come back to me. In other words, if a person really engages in the kind of ethical activity where it connects to others, which sees the sees, as it were, the soul in another human being, has compassion for the other, all of a sudden they come to the realization that that didn't come out of nowhere. That didn't come out of matter blindly running. That the soul is something that somehow has been implanted into us, that it would enable us to even appreciate these kind of ethical acts, right? But I have a long thing that I wrote, Why Believe in God? I'll send it to you. Now, Claudia.
Thank you very much. I appreciate very much the part in which you underlined the importance of the choice. And as far as I have understood, you explain us that in order to do the right choice, we need first to have a certain wisdom. But if I have understood well, such wisdom was created or inspired by God.
Yes.
Therefore, my question is the following. Are we really free to choose whatever we want? So there is the free will in such...
Yes, that's correct. That's correct.
Or not?
Yes.
Or we depend in a certain way from the wisdom created by God?
That's an excellent question, Claudia. I think that you got to the very essence of what I was trying to say. And that is that we are assuming an orderly universe. And that orderly universe is a product of wisdom. And we are part of that orderly universe. And being part of that orderly universe, we then have a link in ourselves and the order of ourselves and the capacity to think to that. And that is because there is this wisdom that God imparted to everything that was created. And that's why I think the question about creation is such an interesting point. Because if it isn't created, then what are we talking about? You see, thank you. That's an excellent. You put your finger right on the issue. Thank you.
So we'll have time for two more questions, one in-house and one online.
First of all, thank you for this great lecture, Professor. I learned a lot of new things and new interpretation, and I really thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you.
And the second one, I have an easy question, not a difficult one.
Thank you.
I am just curious, and I wanted to know, because as you said, the book of Proverbs is categorized in the book of wisdom literature. Right. Does this book has any previous influence by, let's say, wisdom literature books in previous cultures, Egyptian, Persian, and so on? Or it is something unique, given only in particular Jewish culture? Thank you.
Very good question. You see, now if you look at Yechezkel Kaufman, who is one of the great biblical scholars of our time, in fact, I would say that his book, the History of the Religion of Israel, has revolutionized biblical study, especially in Israel. He would argue that the wisdom literature is fairly ancient because it has parallels in Egyptian wisdom literature, in the various surrounding peoples. My own feeling is that that's wrong. I think Kaufman goes out of his way to show, because he even then says P, which is the priestly literature that you find in Leviticus, is also early. Well, I think that's wrong. I think that Proverbs is late, and I think that the P is really late. So my own feeling is that what's in there is not in the ancient wisdom literature. And here again, I think the reason is because what wisdom does is give you a sense of the fact that you have to create yourself and you have to create society. And that's pretty much aligned with Genesis, where God creates the cosmos, and we create the society. In other words, our task is to create a society that fits into the cosmos. And I just wrote an article. In fact, I think I wrote it for the Festschrift for Poma, Andre Poma, called Let Us Make Man, where I even point this out. But then also in the article that I wrote for Cajon on man in history. I'll send you both articles. Yeah, thank you.
Two last questions from the online platform. One is from Anna Salma. I understand wisdom in relation to choices because what we actually choose is influences that in the end determine what we become, what our life becomes.
Right.
But what about wisdom in relation to things we do not choose? For example, unloving parents, loss of loved ones, accidents, traumas, etc. And then I will read the second question from Sarah Joan. Don't most modern scholars consider wisdom to be the female goddess, including in Proverbs?
Okay, I didn't understand the first question, but let me try to get to the second question. Yes, wisdom, chokhmah, is feminine in Hebrew. There's no question about that. But what's very interesting is that if you look at as I said to my class yesterday, in the Hebrew Bible, God is non-sexual. God transcends sexuality, and therefore it frees the Bible to refer to God in feminine terms. So that, for example, if you look at what it says in Exodus 34, God is referred to as Rachum, as I pointed out yesterday. Rechem, it means womb. Rachum, v'chanun, graciousness, being above sexuality. It doesn't have to limit itself to narrow, so-called, quote-unquote, masculine categories like power, powerful, omniscience, omnipotence, things like that. In fact, I would argue that in the Bible, the only reason you need omniscience and omnipotence is to carry out the ethical attributes. The ethical attributes are prior, not secondary. No, I didn't understand the first question, sorry.
The question was, I understand wisdom in relation to choices because what we actually choose is influences that in the end determine what we become, what our life becomes. Yes. But what about wisdom in relation to things we do not choose? For example, unloving parents, loss of loved ones, accident, traumas, etc.
Well, look, there's all kinds of things that happen in life that we don't choose. The real question is we can choose how we respond to those things that happen in our life. I mean, here I think one of the things that is so strange to me is this fascination with Heidegger, because he talks about being cast into the world, right? Hello, didn't he have parents? Is he cast into the world? Oh, come on now. He was never nursed. I'm sure that his mother nursed him. I'm sure that they brought him about, So what kind of being, being in the world, being cast into the world, this sense of fallenness and so. I mean, it's nonsense. It doesn't make any sense to me. It has nothing to do with life, and it certainly has nothing to do with any sense of social connectedness. Look, the reality is that we had parents, didn't we? And our parents took care of us to some extent. In some cases, we were neglected. In some cases, we may not. Those are part of the problems that we face. And in facing them, we then have to decide how we make up for that and try to lead a decent, caring, moral life. What I think is important about the book of Proverbs is that it tells you, look, these are all the ways in which you can go wrong. And these are the things you have to do it right. It talks about not being vain. It talks about being kind. It talks about being humble. It talks about all the different ways. You can make a list. I have them here. All the list of ways in which a person can act in such a way as to bring out the best in themselves and the best in others. so that he would say, act in such a way as to bring out the best in yourself and others. But then here are all the ways in which you not only not bring out the best in yourself, but you do the worst to others, and then you become something that eventually you'll say, what have I done with my life? That's the question, you see.
Okay, we have one more burning question that is going to be made, and this will be the last question.
Thank you. That's great pleasure for me. Thank you, Rabbi Jack. My question is the reflection on your answer to the Claudia's question.
Yes.
As I understand, you said that there is a universal order that is a primarily order comes from the God to the universe and the cosmos.
Creation.
The creation. Right. And how is connected to the free will? Because in Christianity we have a terms of predestination, which is criticized in the context
about
of
like original sin. Is that what you're talking about?
Not much original sin, but I mean that if everything is predestined before, and as you said, predestination, yes. And everything is in order of the God. Why is the point of the free will then?
Yeah. I don't think you have any sense of predestination in the book of Proverbs. I can't think of one verse there that would say that somehow the way you're going to be organizing your life as somehow predestined by either God or anything else. I think it's almost a kind of a overemphasis on choice. And you see, in this respect, it's revolutionary. Because even in Greek, as Claudia well knows, Moira is above the gods. I mean, it's fate or destiny. You don't have that in the book of Proverbs. You have other places in the Bible where there are some elements of that, you see? And that has a lot to do with the way one looks at the issue of time. And also, see, I'm one of those who believes that the future is not real. All it is possible. It's not actual. So to treat the future as if it were actual is ultimately a mistake. And now then, if that's the case, then how can God know what's going to happen 1,000 years from now? But then again, it's the problem if at the moment of creation, God knew everything that was going to take place. Would this be the world that he would create? And if God created knowing everything that we do, this is a problem you have in the Middle Ages, you know. If God knew everything that was going to take place, then in one form or another, he's responsible for it. And then it's not a question of what I do. It's that God knew I was going to do it. So if he's really a good God, why did he let me do it? You see the point? And that's why I think your point when we've had our class on Zoom with respect to free will, we'll discuss this when we get together. The issue of free will is not a simple issue. But what actually Proverbs does is it reinforces the idea that you're in control of your life. That's the issue. Now, where do you have in the ancient world people to tell you that you're in control or you should be in control of your life? And even women should be in control of their life. It constantly talks about not just the father, but the mother. Like we were talking, honor your father and your mother. In Leviticus 19, it says, revere your mother and your father. The mother comes first. It talks about the sorrow of your mother if you behave. I mean, it's so human, as it were. All you have to do is read it. It's a wonderful book. No, it's not Job. Job is a whole other story. You know? But look at the great treasure that you have in the scriptures. Really, just look at it. Look at the wisdom. Look at the variety. Look at the vastness that you have. And as I get older, I find more reality in the Bible than I do in the daily papers, for example. It doesn't mean anything to me, but what you read in the Bible, you really see wisdom, you see.
Well, let me thank you on behalf of everyone here and those who followed us online.
Thank you.
We have some very faithful people as far away as California that checks in all the time to follow us. So we want to greet them and thank them for their presence, and especially all of you for coming this evening. And for Jack BEMPORAD, who always opens up new vistas for us. And it's because of your love for the Word of God. So I think, as an example from the book of Proverbs, you have shown us how it is lived.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you. This lecture, of course, was being co-sponsored with the John Paul II Institute for Interreligious Dialogue, and Elena is here with us this evening, and I'm sure some are following online. And we want to thank them for their support of our activity, and especially of your presence here with us again.
It's my honor to be here, Jim. Thank you.
So you are always welcome to come back and open another chapter.
All right. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you once.
Thanks, Jim.